Well, good evening and welcome to a special meeting of the Federal Way City Council, the first of the year for January 2nd, 2019. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. On this special City Council meeting, we've got the main order of business is the study session for the Mayor's Homelessness Task Force final report. We have Yarden Weidenfeld, Senior Policy Advisor in my office, and he's going to be running through it. I would like to say a very special thank you to the members of the task force. We've got Judge Larson here who helped us, and he, as I was saying the other day, I think he's going to get the Oscar for editing in a major report. And I also want to thank our task force chair, Sherry Edwards, for taking this on and for all the work she has done, along with all her colleagues on the task force. This went on for 8 months. It was a tremendous amount of work. And to say thank you to all those who participated is simply words fail to encompass the tremendous responsibility and the difficult task that was asked of this group. So to all those members of the task force that are here, and for those who couldn't make it, thank you. With that, now for our business tonight, we're going to have an executive session, and we're going to need to stop in 1 hour and 25 minutes. And so I'll go ahead and turn this over to Yarden to get this going, but we will need to be prudent with our time. So with that, Yarden, please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor and Deputy Mayor, and thank you, members of City Council. So as the Mayor directed back in March, the task force report was released on time on the date that's on the cover sheet there, December 21st, 2018. And if anyone in the audience, I think all council members should have copies of the PowerPoint as well as a report. There are also copies of the report and the PowerPoint at the table back there for audience members if anyone wants them. So I'll get right to it. So as the Mayor said, we had 26 task members, 26 members on the task force, including our chair, Sherry Edwards, who was here, our vice chair, Jeff Bellinghausen, who is here, and at the risk of neglecting something, I know Judge Larson is here as well, Peggy Laporte, and I think Willa Gaines and Lynn Ormsby, and Jackie Muth, who's been in the task force, and Robin Korak I see over there, and did I miss? And Ken Stark, who's the vice chair of the Human Services Commission as well. And of course, Jeff Watson and Sarah Bridgeford and I were staffing the task force. So we had a representation of a wide variety of people: the city, citizens, fire, healthcare agencies, service agencies, the school district, the court, of course, library, business, and police. Task force was formed earlier this year. I think the genesis of it was with the Mayor's Homeless Mothers and Children Initiative, HMCI, which Mayor Farrell launched actually 2 years ago, virtually exactly. And that had a somewhat narrow goal to find a sheltering for homeless families with children that were on the street in Federal Way. And at the end of 2017, I'm losing track of the years, this now being 2019, so the end of the year before last, we basically achieved that with at that point at least, with the New Hope Church offering to do that with Pastor Rick Miller, and then also successfully did solicit the $100,000 from the state to house homeless families with children. And then following up on that, last February 18, this City Council named homelessness one of the top 3 issues with which you directed that the staff should be dealing with. That's it. So as an outgrowth of both of those items, Mayor Farrell convened the larger task force last April and was charged it with working, as it says there, to better understand homelessness in Federal Way and to develop a strategic plan of action. So the task force meeting started in April. We met twice per month on Wednesdays from 8:30 to 10 a.m. in the morning. Every month from April to December. I tend to be persnickety about facts, so I mean, other than November, we only had 1 meeting in November, but other than that, we met twice per month, April through December. And it kind of was divided into 3 phases. The earliest meetings, the first 5, were kind of thematic informational meetings where we basically, I think our chair, Sherry Edwards, really believed that the task force members had to sort of start with a foundation of knowledge from everybody, so that everyone was sort of starts on the same page. So we heard a very very, very wide variety of presentations. We were at the point, I think we had like 6 or 7 presentations in one meeting. It was really quite packed. The first one was kind of introductory, but each one had kind of a theme. Our second meeting was about the state of homelessness in Federal Way. The third about services in Federal Way. The fourth about homelessness and the community. And then the fifth one, we got into some of the causes of homelessness. We had the speakers, I think basically all of them were members of the task force. So basically people who represented the police, human service agencies, healthcare agencies, school district, the city itself. Jeff Watson and Sarah both gave presentations that basically educated everyone, so we all kind of were starting with the same foundation of knowledge. So that's how we kind of spent the first 5 meetings. Starting with meeting 5, we transitioned into working into task groups, and we kind of, in addition to the full task groups meetings, the chair, Sherry, the vice chair, Jeff Bellinghausen, and then the staff, Jeff Watson, Sarah Bridgeford, and I would meet usually about a week before each meeting and would kind of figure out, kind of how to plan for the meetings, what kind of agenda we should have, and what we should be looking at. And after a lot of work of proposition, I think Jeff Watson did a lot of the kind of background in this and coming up with ideas. We ultimately determined that we try to get everyone into 4 task groups, and we did that. The first one, the data group that would be looking at the state of homelessness in Federal Way, the statistics, the root causes of homelessness. The second group would look at housing and day resources, basically looking at resources that were specifically tied or directed towards people experiencing homelessness, as opposed to, not opposed to, but I think it was Sarah's idea that it would be important to separate that from other services like healthcare and like say food banks that can serve people who aren't homeless and are homeless, mental health, addiction treatment, and so on. So that was such a wide area that I believe that Sarah felt that should be 2 different task groups, and we proposed that. And then task group 3 was on the community effects of homelessness, how it affects the community at large, not just people who are experiencing homelessness themselves. The final meetings, 14 to 17, mostly were spent reviewing task group reports and formulating the final report. As the mayor mentioned just at the start, I really, I think that Sherry and Jeff Bellinghausen would agree with me, and again, a special, and Jeff and Sarah as well. A special thanks to Judge Larson, who really went above and beyond in the call of duty. We had all kind of worked, Sarah, Jeff, Sherry, Jeff Bellinghausen, and I all kind of worked together at editing the task group reports that each of them came up with into a cohesive whole. I did some more editing on it at the end, sent it out, and I think the general consensus at the second to last meeting was it's good stuff, but it needs kind of condensing, reworking, kind of making into a more unified narrative voice and so on. And Judge Larson really just volunteered to do that himself, and so and sent out something that I think was just absolutely really kind of untied the knot to some extent. So really big thanks for him. The last meetings we also had a few more presentations from Battlefield Addiction. I think someone's here maybe from Battlefield. I had heard might come, but very interesting, innovative agency that really tries to get families involved in addiction treatment, and apparently have a level of success on people that literally, they told us, had gone through 50 or 60 treatments in some cases and unsuccessful, and then they've been successful after that. So we also heard towards the very end from Becca at the Greater Federal Way Chamber of Commerce about their study on homelessness. So there's a few more presentations at the end, but we were kind of mostly putting it together. So what were the findings of the task force? So first of all, we looked at, we actually kind of fleshed out this section more towards the end of our reporting period, because there's a lot of talk of, and the report focuses a lot on the effects of homelessness on the community at large. But part of the mayor's charge was that we also look at, actually, you know what, I skipped ahead for a second. I apologize. So the first thing we were looking at was the causes of homelessness. So we kind of took, I guess I would say, a balanced approach. We had a presentation that that was given or led by a discussion led by Dan Wise from Catholic Community Services that had to do with the McKinsey & Company study that basically, and I actually went to a separate presentation of it myself that had to do with Sound Cities, in which basically their findings are that the main issue by far is not individually based, is not things like addiction and mental health, but is simply a housing shortage. And I think there were, to be fair, some task force members that strongly took that approach, but many task force members on the other side, felt that there are, in addition, that that it says at the bottom there that the shortage of affordable housing is significant, but you can't just increase the supply without addressing the root causes. That'll only temporarily mask the problem. So we need to look at root causes for each individual because the causes, and I think Judge Larson in particular did some work on this and looking into this, the causes are as varied as the individuals experiencing homelessness. There's not one cookie cutter cause, so there's not one cookie cutter solution. And narrow or limited programs are not going to work, and even in many cases will exacerbate the problem. So we need to look at each individual and find a tailored, comprehensive solution to each individual, not just cookie cutter stuff. So in addition to recognizing in a balanced approach that lack of affordable housing is certainly also an issue. In addition, the mayor's charge was not only to look at impacts on the community, which is a large part of the report. I mean, the task group 3 that was looking at that, actually each one of that task group's members, I think 5 of them, wrote their own separate reports. So there's a lot in the report that has to do on this. But towards the end of formulating this, we realized that we didn't have enough on there about also one of the mayor's charge, which was to make findings on what impacts homelessness has on the people who are experiencing it. And we looked at that, and I think Jeff Watson, who works with, and Sarah that work with people in that situation, and of course Sherry Edwards, who volunteers so much, and the chair. These are people living in crisis. They have no place to go. They have no warm or safe or dry place to sleep. I mean, it's hard to imagine being in that position, and I think that in Sherry in particular, as the chair, really gave us some very powerful anecdotes that we have of people that are in this situation. No guarantee of a next meal or even water to drink. Disrupted family life, of course. Also, children. We had a member of the school district and D-Zone on the task force, and understand about how children struggle to do well in school when their families are homeless and they struggle to fit in. The stories that we hear, the anecdotes, are people that are living in a constant life of fear and desperation, helplessness and depression. And in addition, and again, to quote Sherry, I think gave us some really powerful anecdotes about how, in many ways, many people say that the personal assault on their personal dignity is worse than the physical ailments, worse than being hungry, and worse than not having a place to sleep. The indignity. And there was a story we heard from Sherry that talked about how someone who was in that situation was basically treated with contempt by someone, like, "What are you doing here? Get away from my store." That's actually worse for many people than the physical issues. And finally, although we do hear a lot of, and there is a basis for it, of an element of the homeless community that Deputy Chief Neal really spent a lot of time explaining to us. And actually, he's here as well. I forgot to acknowledge him. I apologize about that, Deputy Chief. But that's an element of it. But people experiencing homelessness are often victims of crime and abuse themselves, more likely than perpetrators. So we have to remember that as well. So that's an important element of this. We did follow up on the mayor's charge to look at community impacts of homelessness. And like I said, one of them is, and the key issue for many, many people in this community that we found, from everything from statistics, from crime statistics, from anecdotes, from people on our task forces, public safety and crime is a major issue. We wanted to make it clear, and we crafted this language even towards the last meeting, and with approval of law enforcement and so on, that we want to make it clear that the majority of those experiencing homelessness are law-abiding citizens, that we're not like trying to categorize all homeless people in this category, but there's no question that some of people that are experiencing homelessness are impacting the community adversely. I think Deputy Chief Neal, this wasn't something that was we had a statistic on, but he estimated that at any one time there's maybe 65 people in Federal Way that are living in encampments, and those are the people that are causing the problems. So we're really talking about 65 people out of the whole homeless population at any one time that are causing the problems. Criminal behavior outlined in more detail in the report itself, anything from, assaults, robberies, threats, trespassing, that really make the quality of life much more problematic for people. Deputy Chief Neal emphasized repeatedly when giving presentations about this that the police deal with only the criminal homeless. So, basically these data are referring to people in that situation, but that is an important thing to keep in mind, that is a part of it. And then, of course, there's the panhandling that also people feel degrades quality of life. Most egregiously and most people talk about the most are the unlawful encampments that are not only dangerous for the people here, but are dangerous for the occupants. They're a place that are filled according to police, with violent crime, in many cases litter, no sanitation, no adequate health care, used drug paraphernalia, food waste, human waste. In some cases, they cause fires. It's a big, big problem for the community, and it's something that, you know, Mayor Farrell has been, I think, unique among King County mayors in essentially adopting a zero-tolerance approach and authorizing the police to dismantle these dangerous encampments. I think, Mayor, if I remember correctly, at your State of the City in January, you said that if one of your own relatives were in one of these encampments, you would go there immediately and try to pull them out. And I think that our findings from the task force really bear that up. These are awful places, and no one should be living like that. You know, it was a little bit controversial to some extent for us to include this, but I think the consensus of the task force was, as long as we were balanced, that it was very important for people to see what these look like. A lot of people don't actually see this. So I want to make it clear that this is an encampment that I think Deputy Chief Neal provided a bunch of photos from just a couple of months ago in October at Pack Highway in South 304th near Steel Lake. This was in a private property. I did verify that. So private people had to pay to clean this up. You can see the kind of just complete lack of any kind of sanitation or order in those kinds of this kind of place. And I want to make it clear also that I selected a couple of photos, but we could spend here all afternoon looking at photos like this, because there's dozens of these photo encampments that have been taken down very zealously by the police at Mayor Farrell's direction. And each encampment, there's probably dozens of pictures. I went to one myself with Tim, our economic development director, and took some of our own photos about a year ago. I didn't include those photos, but I wanted to select a few. So there's another one that came out just as the task force that Deputy Chief Neal sent me in December at South 312th and First Avenue, and he sent me a bunch of photos from that. There's another one. So these are just one example. I mean, this is not I could go on and on like this if you want to spend all afternoon on this. Public safety and crime. So unlawful encampments. In addition, we're concerned with, it's not just a matter of public health and people's personal safety, but there's environmental concerns as well, because these encampments pollute our watersheds. And Sherry and I specifically at the end asked Public Works Director E.J. Walsh for some evidence of that, and E.J. sent me this picture here from Panther Lake. I don't know, I know it was recent, I don't know the date of it exactly, but this was a result of some of the encampments have caused this kind of degradation on Panther Lake. So, you know, it's an overall problem to the environment as well. This also, in the police statistics, has resulted in increasing police and code compliance involvement. We've gotten a question as to where these stats come from, and Deputy Chief Neal explained to us that the police, starting in 2016, started coding with I think the code TRAN for transient, any criminal calls for service that involved a person or people experiencing homelessness. So that's how they're able to track this. They found that between 2016 and 2017 that there was a 105% increase, so more than double, criminal calls for service involving a person or people experiencing homelessness. Now, I put in there, just to be very clear, because this is very important to note, that overall federal hate crime rate was down 10% in 2017, and appears, I don't think final figures were done yet, but appears another 10% down in 2017. So that's important. However, the crime by this segment of the homeless community, 105% increase 16 17. When the report was done, we didn't have final stats for 17 to 18, but Deputy Chief Neal reported to us that he suspects it'll be even more than a 105% increase for 2017 to 2018. So this is a major problem, the impact on the community this way from criminal elements in the homeless community. In addition, let's move on. So we also had business people on the task force. I introduced, for instance, Jackie Muth, who's here as well, who owns a business at Kitts Corner, and I think she did some work on this and reported to us some of the costs to not only businesses in particular, also residents. That I think Jackie reported she spends 45 minutes every morning of her workday cleaning up from trash that's left by the homeless population near her place of business. Also repairing property, replacing stolen property. They have to pay for security costs in many cases, and other direct and indirect expenses. So this is another thing that has really, at some point, businesses are going to be looking at this and want a solution. I did Ms. Muth actually gave us some pictures here that were presented to the task force from her business in the Kids Corner neighborhood. This was just one day, what she found right outside her business that she owns. And this is the kind of thing they have to deal with. They spend, 45 minutes to an hour a week. So we're talking about, or 45 minutes, I think it was reported. So, in time that could be productive business time dealing with this kind of thing. So, important thing to keep in mind. I think that a lot of the consensus was that perhaps the worst community impact, to look at this in a broad-minded way, is that it creates mistrust. Judge Larson had talked about this a lot when he talked this. It creates a them and us atmosphere. You see this kind of thing that creates opposition to any attempts to provide services, which then, then there isn't dealing with those people in the community that really do need the services, so it creates an ongoing no-win cycle. And maybe that's the worst community impact of homelessness, if you want to look at it in a broad-minded way. Finally, the mayor had wanted us to do findings on the available services there. We did see that many of them are silos that really work independently, that aren't really coordinating with each other. On the other hand, as the Multi-Service Center pointed out to us, that there are many that actually are models of cooperative efforts. So we don't want to lose sight of that as well. However, overall, it seems like the services are difficult to navigate. There's no cohesive interface where someone can just go to and know where the services are. We know there's inadequate capacity. There's more of a need than there is available services. There's also, and this is something which is sort of a little bit beyond the scope of the task force, but there is an inequity in the distribution of services in the county, where South King County is really not getting its kind of fair share, you might say, of state and county funds on this. So that's part of the problem as well. And then you have conflicting regulations and policies that, that contribute to this as being a ineffective, inconsistent delivery, that, every agency has its own policies. That also creates difficulty when there's conflicts there. Also, key on this, again, we're really blessed to have an actual judge in our court that was so invested in this, but Muni Court has unique ability, of course, to compel treatment. They unlike any other agency, they can force people to go into treatment. However, as I'm pointing out, we don't want to be in a position where, we're the only people that are being dealt with that way are people that commit crimes. I mean, we'd rather have people served who are not criminals as well. But there has been success with community court. However, more could be done to increase compliance with the sentences and reduce jail costs and assist in community cleanup. We will see later in the recommendations that we talk about structured community service, which could be we'll talk about that in a minute. Work crew, again, talk about that in the recommendations, and maybe even a pretrial release program that encourages referrals to treatment and other services. So that's something that could be done there. So now we finally get to the kind of you might say the meat of this. So addressing impacts, so we divided our recommendations into two halves. First of all, addressing impacts for individuals, and then addressing impacts to the community. So under impacts for individuals, the first recommendation is to expand shelters as gateways for progress. We all realize that basically the goal is that there be available shelter year-round for anyone who's a single adult, a family, and youth. Right now, through Reach Out, we have sheltering about 6 months in the year. I think it's expanding, though, to 7. It may be expanding. There was some talk about that. But 6 months from, I think, October through March, right? For single adults. At this point, we don't have in federal way for families or youth. We also need to link to other services and programs. And, it's important, and we kept this in mind all the time, that the city can't do this alone. The city doesn't have the ability. We need to identify partners, properties, resources, and outside funding streams are very important. And when we were putting together this report, we kind of tried to ensure that nothing of this was impractical. So, we worded this very, very carefully about how how this would be done. We don't want to set unrealistic goals here. So in everything we did, we kind of checked, and Sarah and Jeff were involved in this and seeing it as realistic. So this is something that community services would have to work on to identify partners and properties and funding streams for this. So, and that's something they said that was possible. Now, recommendation number 2 is sort of disguised in a certain way because in some respects, as I think Judge Larson's email makes clear that he sent to all the City Council this morning, this is maybe the most important recommendation. This is central to everything. I mean, it's sort of hidden there as recommendation 2. But this is really the kind of the central recommendation of the task force, is that the city create a community or coordinated response that would be an ongoing collaborative group charged with coordinating and maximizing services and positive outcomes for people experiencing homelessness using the official continuum of care and progress model. It could be composed of lots of different groups, including the types of people that are on the task force, business, agencies, healthcare, but it could even be broader than that. Obviously, it has to have police and fire, and it could be, the report itself lists a number of other types of agencies that could be on it, but it's important that it be broad-based. We had on there, you know, the library, of course, the fire, the schools, like colleges locally, the city, of course, landlords, businesses, of course, low-income housing developers, people themselves experiencing homelessness, and so on. We did say that we'd like to see if it was staffed, if and when funds are available, by a new paid staff member from the city, if possible. That is the element that is on the proposed amended legislative agenda that was presented and will be discussed in the regular meeting tonight at 7, that we asked for funding for a new staff person that would be able to coordinate this. Now, I want to make it clear, as there was a concern at one point that, well, if there's no money for it, then this doesn't happen. We still recommend, the collaborative group is very important. It would be great if we could staff it with the city. If not, it still has to happen. That's the central recommendation there. The recommendation 3, develop a community coordinated outreach program. This is really an extension of the second recommendation that group also have maybe a subgroup that would be engaging in outreach to ensure that people are engaged with and connected to coordinated services and housing opportunities through outreach teams. Especially useful when encampments are dismantled. And the truth is that, from what I understand from Deputy Chief Neal, that's already being done to some extent. The encampment, one of the encampments I showed you the picture of before, the one in October, I think it was, or December, one of them, Deputy Chief Neal was, actually, I had a lot more details on that in the report, that, that before that was dismantled, everyone there was given warnings and was given advance notice and was given, hooked up with coordinated, with services and people that went out with them. In the end, actually, even though that encampment was completely dismantled, the police did not have to make a single arrest on that. So, the police are already doing this to a large extent, and Deputy Chief Neal said that it would be great if the police could have more outreach personnel to come with them. So, this is something that the police very much support. And they can also use peer mentors. I'm going to get to that in a second in recommendation 8, so I'm not going to go into that right now. Recommendation 4 is, and this came out of the task group 4, you might say, looking at other services there. I think that group, the one thing they really focused on was that, again, as it says in the findings, there was really the lack of kind of a unified one place for people to go to find services. And they discovered that, in particular, the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, had a great, tool that was online that basically essentially hooked people into everything. They could just go onto there, and it was very user-friendly and was able to do that. We tried to make some outreach to Philadelphia. I actually had a contact of mine that has a connection there. I don't know how much we did that, although one of their key recommendation from that task group is that there be an easily accessible online resource that would list services available, that was regularly updated. It can be done in one of 3 ways. The city could do that itself. The legislative agenda that the City Council already passed includes a $150,000 request for this item that would pay for software and a staffer. However, some people felt, and Jeff Watson, I think, said to me, this would only be probably if the state were to grant money, they'd want it to be a cooperation with other municipalities or even the county. And also some people raise, well, what about 2-on-1, which tries to do this. Now, 2-on-1 doesn't have everything, but it could be something we could work in collaboration with them. So I know there's some agencies, I think Fusion actually, I don't think uses 2-on-1. So, so it's not necessarily but that's one way of looking at that. So that was recommendation 4 that came out of task group 4. Recommendation 5 is the increasing the available affordable housing. Like I said, we again tried to take a real balanced approach to this. The overall approach was we have to look at root causes and dealing with issues in people's lives and really have a targeted approach to them. But we also realized that, as it said in the findings, that this is still an issue. Again, we were very careful when we looked at this and not to set unrealistic goals. So I want to go through this a little bit carefully. That one thing, the recommendation includes completing a comprehensive inventory of housing stock and assess the need for additional affordable housing and identifies next steps. Again, that's something that Jeff and Sarah said their department could do. So it really starts by looking overall at a little more detail in this. Now, the second one, I want to be clear about this. It says seek to increase for people with incomes below 30% very mean income. That does not necessarily mean, we were very careful in not saying that that was an absolute goal. It was an aspirational goal to some extent, because it may not be possible. One of the things that we found out, and actually former Mayor Gene Burbidge went through this with us at the task force, that, and actually in other forums as well, for all income levels other than below 30%, Federal Way is more than meeting its requirements under the Growth Management Act. So there's really no issue with anything except that income level. Now, for below 30%, though, as Gene Burbidge pointed out to me, not a single community is meeting the official goals on that. So it's not as if Federal Way, you know, we don't want to be in a position where, you know, we're sort of the only city that's sort of meeting this, and that we become the sort of the magnet for that. So I mean, it's a very important thing to keep in mind, that although we're not meeting those goals, no community in King County is meeting those goals. Not even close, I don't think. Well, I want to know about that. I don't know the details, but they're not meeting it. So again, the recommendation part of it is to seek it. You know, again, it's aspirational more than a specific thing. We need to improve collaboration with King County Coordinated Entry. Again, that's something that Community Services will work on. Consider ways to reduce the development barriers, and there's some ideas there. Consider incentives to developers to include affordable housing. I like this one because it says sign onto the interlocal agreement of South King Housing and Homeless. That's been done. The council already approved that, so that's kind of a done deal at this point. And again, aspirationally create and or seek additional funding streams for ongoing subsidies and housing voucher programs. So that again is seeking, and again something that Jeff and Sarah said that they could work on. So I want to make that clear. These are aspirational. These are not, you know, we're not setting actual like benchmark, because that would not be realistic considering the situation here. We wanted to include because you know, some people felt that the pictures show a negative view of the homeless population, and like I said, the consensus on the task force was the truth. You know, truth might hurt, but we got to show the truth. So those pictures were very important. I think there were some task force members that wanted them omitted because they were, you know, seen as inflammatory, but this is the truth. This is what, you know, people like business people are dealing with. But to balance that, task force members also felt we should include some other pictures. So we got some pictures that, thank you, Robin Korak supplied from Multi-Service Center of, you know, nice looking affordable housing, including the William J. Wood Veterans House, which is a great facility here in Federal Way. And then a couple more facilities. I didn't name them in here because I think Sherry and I talked about not wanting to necessarily call out where the affordable housing facilities are, but these are some other photos of some nice looking affordable housing facilities that were given to me by Robin at Multi-Service Center. Going on to recommendation 6, increase the equitable delivery of services. Again, like I'd said before, this one is something that may be almost beyond the city. We really need to develop a strategy in conjunction with Community Coordinated Response Team at recommendation 2 to address how inequitable the services and housing solutions are in Federal Way. We're not getting our fair share in a certain sense, and including particularly mental health, addiction, and shelters. So we need to. We very much need to, that coordinated response needs to look at that issue to some extent. Recommendation 7, this was also an outgrowth of Task Group 4, that we partner with local agencies to install free public phones. Their findings were that, obviously telephone access is a necessity. People want to make appointments, not miss appointments, make sure that they're, hooked in with agencies. They need phone access. And although many people who are homeless have cell phones, they're usually prepaid and often run out of minutes. So these could be put at transit centers or libraries or other public places. And the idea would be that they would have limited capability, like, could only be outgoing or only in this area code, or maybe even only 211 calling or something like that. So not in a situation where people are just spending all the time, misusing them. Recommendation 8 is, like I said before, to hire and train peer navigators. Peer navigators are people with lived experience, people who have themselves overcome addiction or had trouble with housing or sought treatment for mental health. And our consensus was, and I'm not going to mention names, but we had on the task force several people, one in particular that themselves had recently experienced in homelessness. And I think that this person in his representation task force really felt that many of the treatment or many of the agencies he felt really he couldn't relate to a lot of the people because they hadn't experienced what he had experienced. So, I think that he was really keen on this idea that we really need to have peer navigators that can connect to the homeless community, that can build trust more quickly, that can help provide referrals to resources and maybe work for a partnering organization. They could work for the city as well, but, could also work for a partnering organization. So that ends the ones on homeless people themselves. So now we go to the recommendations on the community. So number one recommendation that came out of, these almost all came out of Task Group 3, and we looked at, one thing was the safe parking program. A lot of people felt this would be a really good thing. That the largest portion, our findings were of the unsheltered homeless communities living in cars, 28%, 46% increase this year over 2017 based on the one-night count. So the idea would be to allow churches to offer the opportunity for individuals temporarily residing in their vehicles to use the church parking lots with their permission after hours for overnight safe parking. Obviously, it would need a church to agree to it. They would have to deal with that and agree to do it. They would have to have limitations, requirements based on the size of the parking lot, its location, duration, frequency. They need to make sure security and sanitary facilities are available and garbage control. So, it's something that would have to be done with, some regulation, although it may require possibly changes to federal revised code because with reasonable restrictions and requirements for a use permit like this. The reason being currently Muni Code 19.130.290 makes it illegal for a person to sleep in a vehicle in a residential zone for more than 14 days straight in a 180-day period. But on the other hand, there is some case law that suggests that for churches, such regulations are only allowed constitutionally if they're necessary to protect public health and safety. So it might be worth looking at an amendment that would allow this kind of thing with reasonable restrictions for, protect public safety and public health and requirements for a use permit before it would be granted. Recommendation 2 is to create a group to collaborate cleanup programs. I'm trying to avoid calling out individual task force members, but the very well-known and kind of famous federal weigh-in, Shelley Pauls took the ball with this and came up with a whole bunch of ideas, and also Judge Larson was working this as well. First of all, expanding the current work group program. I went through this at the time of our legislative agenda. This, by the way, the group could be, again, would probably be part of the larger community coordinated response. It would have to be an outgrowth of it. But looking at different ideas that this group could look at, including expanding the current work group program, which is currently a jail alternative in federal way. As Mayor and I were both former prosecutors, and we both knew that often one of the best ways to deal with lower level crimes is to sentence people to a work crew rather than filling up jail space for lower level crimes. So we do that now through a contract with DOC, but because we don't pay for a larger level contract, all the work is done in Seattle. So we're not getting any benefit from it. So option 1 would be to expand the contract. It would cost about $80,000 a year. That, again, is part of the past legislative agenda to ask for money for that. The other possibility is for us to run the work for ourselves, but we didn't do a detailed budget on this, but it would be likely cost more than the DOC contracting, which is probably the best way to go, I would think. Again, another thing that could come up out of these cleanup programs is what we have been referring to as the Albuquerque type program. Mayor Farrell mentioned this in his State of the City last year. The Albuquerque program, type program, it wouldn't have to be exactly that, would pay panhandlers like a wage for doing cleanup work around the city, operating on a daily basis. In looking at it earlier last year in the mayor's office with a staff person was working with me, it would need to be with the local nonprofit partnering. City could not do it ourselves. We would not be able to pay cash. Participants could also, at the end of their workday, be put in touch with services, so that would be helpful. And we thought a trial run would be about $50,000, and that again is at part of the legislative agenda that's been passed to ask for that. So that's another thing as well. Another possibility that this group, this is all part of recommendation 2, by the way. Recommendation 2, again, continuing, another option for cleanup is community service, which could be used, Judge Larson knows a lot about that, also as a jail or even a fine alternative in municipal court for people to do community service for local nonprofits. Would not require a substantial investment of city resources. Another thing that I think people have mixed feelings about, these are all ideas that were come up with that this group could look at, but to post signs that in known panhandling locations that urge people to donate to a local nonprofit rather than giving to panhandlers. They could even contain the phone number or website of a nonprofit. And we had some photos here in the next slide that show the types of thing that have existed that we had. This is what some of the examples here that talk about that people could immediately even text a number or call a number and immediately give to an agency rather than directly to a panhandler. Another idea, again, all part of recommendation 2, is to research better garbage can options. I see EJ had to leave for another, oh no, he's still here. So we talked, Sherry and I talked with EJ about this, and again, this is something, that's why it says research. It's not necessarily, it's something be up to Public Works Department. EJ told us when Sherry and I talked to him that some communities have been very happy with these, some communities have not. So, we have to look into that. They're also very expensive, but the photo at the bottom is an example of the type of thing that we're talking about. The idea is that they are kind of like, I guess you might call them high-tech kind of trash facilities that that basically they close so people supposedly can't dumpster dive, are kind of locked. So that's the idea, to look into that. Again, still part of recommendation 2 to revisit, adopt a stop or adopt a highway program. The idea is local business or groups would take responsibility for cleanup at a particular location, and then we'd post signs advertising their contribution. Again, Sherry and I spoke with EJ about this, and he explained to us this has mixed effect, hasn't really been done to great effect in Federal Way. It tends to kind of work for a little while and then decline. So it's something that we'd have to look at. It's not necessarily a panacea for garbage. Also, part of recommendation to research what other cities are doing successfully, like, for instance, requiring clients at shelters to give back by picking up litter. And then another one is to educate people and individuals not to give unneeded items. There's some talk about this in our task force that a lot of people don't know what people experiencing homelessness need. They end up giving unneeded items that they don't really need at all. And an example I remember at Thanksgiving time, some people said that, a lot of people when they actually talked to the people said they were, in terms of their food needs, they were looking for protein. What they wanted was like turkey. They didn't need the other items there. That was not something they were really interested in. They just wanted the turkey, basically. So, that's one small example, but there are a lot of items that end up being given to homeless people that they just discard. They don't need them. So it's important to to keep that in mind, that, to be careful about that and recommend donations instead to a service agency that knows exactly what they would need. The next thing, again, still under recommendation 2, is to have encourage businesses not to have donation bins. I think Public Works agrees with this. If I remember talking to EJ, that these bins just become a place where people just throw trash and they steal from it. I think police said they even find people sleeping in these. So these are not good uses. So this is the example we're talking about. Those are things that businesses they might think they're doing a good turn, but it's not a good thing. We should encourage them not to do that. Again, still part of recommendation 2, the final thing, I think this is a big Shelley Paul's thing, to maybe have some fun and creative marketing ideas about keeping our city with clever signs urging people not to litter. I like this one. There is no poop ferry. I thought that was kind of funny, and a picture of a ferry there. So, it's an idea that came up with. So, going into recommendation 3 now, finally, this was something that was originally left out of our draft because it's so obvious and there's really no improvement needed. But at our very last meeting, the consensus was that we still needed to put it in there, really, if anything, to recognize the great job the police are doing. This is actually, to be honest, this was pretty much written by Deputy Chief Neal and as to what they're doing and need to continue doing: vigilant, effective, collaborative, and mission-focused law enforcement. Currently, the police have an entire team of officers who devote all of their time just to homeless issues, to supplement patrol. Very important. They need to network and do network with other cities and regional efforts and share successes and new ideas. Continuing what I said before, the collaborative citywide efforts, which include all the resources represented in the task force. Again, Deputy Chief Neal had said to us the more the merrier, that having those resources available when they dismantle a task force is great, and the more of that, the better. And the most importantly, and we just thought to reiterate, it's kind of obvious and it's done, but police have to remain committed to their mission to keep everyone in the community safe and secure in our daily life. And that was, again, written by Deputy Chief Neal. They do that really well right now. And although it's so obvious, we originally took this out, the consensus was it needed to go in there as a recommendation, at least just to acknowledge the great work the police are doing and continuing. Finally, almost finally, recommendation 4, better coordinate with criminal justice programs. That was something that I think Judge Larson could probably speak to a little better than me, to incorporate restorative practices in conjunction with the community coordinated response, which those techniques, and then defendants seen in court can then interface with existing community programs to help reduce recidivism. So basically coordinating the criminal justice with the overall coordinated response. And finally, recommendation 5, this came from some work that was done both by Shelley Pauls and Deputy Chief Neal, that it's really important to prevent the reestablishment. Once the police have done a great job of dismantling encampments, but also, need to continue monitoring to enforce the closure and also prevent any from getting into an extreme condition. Also, as we know and talked about, the 2 pictures I showed you were from private landowners. Private landowners should be encouraged, and I think this would help the police if they can, to pool their resources and hire a security firm to guard against this kind of thing. That would really make the police's job a lot easier and would help, avoid this kind of thing. And then Deputy Chief Neal actually had put this in that, consider looking at a cost analysis of underbrush clearing. That's been really successful preventing reoccupation of cleared encampments, but it's very expensive to landowners. So something they need to look at, maybe at the cost analysis in comparison. But it's very important that we encourage private landowners from preventing these in the first place and preventing them from being reestablished. So that is the final recommendation under the addressing impacts of the community. We obviously, as the mayor said, put a lot of work into this, and again, have many of the task force members here, and it's been a really great experience, I think, for all of us to delve deeply. I think Judge Larson sent a really great email out to everyone this morning that followed up on that. So at this point, I want to turn it over to our chair, Sherry Edwards, and I think she has some words for us, and we can take questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Yarden. Can you stay here?
Yeah, let me just take
Yes,
back the cutter.
All right, so are we taking questions from council or from the
Sure.
public as well?
Good question. Let's start with the council, and if anybody has any questions, we'll want to make sure that people come up to the podium so they can be, acknowledged and everyone can hear them. Let's start with.
Do they need to fill out a pink sheet? I think we do have a few people that might want to.
That's probably a wise course. Yeah.
Okay.
That's probably.
So there's pink sheets if anybody wants to ask a question.
But Sherry, is there anything that, just to start off with, it was a lengthy presentation. Thank you, Yarden, for that very thorough presentation. We obviously have the report. We had gone through some permutations, some edits. You guys worked for 8 months. Any sort of, comments you'd like to make about the process and the final product?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, everyone. It was very educational. We learned a lot. Now we have a community with 25 people, 26 people that are just really educated on what is out there. We were surprised. There was a lot of surprises I guess I was kind of anticipating finding a lot of gaps, but we really were impressed at how many different organizations are doing things. It's just a matter of what we discovered was a lot of people were just not connected. We just don't know that from other service providers what the other person's doing. So these recommendations I'm really excited about. This is the first step, and this was a lot of work. We really broke down every aspect that we could possibly think of that affects homelessness and the community and people experiencing homelessness. And we didn't want to leave anything out. And I think some of you saw my PowerPoints, my charts, and my maps, and we just had to, before we could even get to anywhere close to these recommendations, we had to really figure out what was happening here in Federal Way. So we couldn't have done this amount of work without this task force. And I have no idea how much time the individuals put into it, other than it was a lot. So we're really thankful to you for setting this up, and to the task group. I know Judge Larson is going to want to say something too, but I'm ready to take questions if anybody has any.
Well, let's start there. Council, are there any questions of either Sherry or Yarden at this stage? Okay. We're going to hear from the public in just a few minutes. Lydia, or Jesse, were you? Councilmember Cephedos or Councilmember Johnson? Councilmember Cephedos.
Comments?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much, you condensed this 18-page report to this, and it's still exhaustive, but thank you so much. And thank you for the work everybody put into this, because it's very important. Some of my comments, one of them, I know you did mention that there was someone who has experienced homelessness in the past, but I think that's a person that was missing on the board maybe that had firsthand and present experience that was presenting. But regardless, I think you addressed most of the things that would have been crucial, right?
Are you asking if we did or if we did not?
I think at the end I did hear, because
We
looking
did.
at the list, you did not. I didn't see anybody
Oh,
that
I
was
think we were
labeled as.
trying to protect privacy
Correct.
to a bit.
So
to a-
that would have been my comment, but at the end, I heard Yarden say that there was an individual who had experienced homelessness. So that, thank you very much, because that was my concern. And/or it would have been helpful if you had someone also from like public housing entity. But it's not too late, because they can still chime in, I believe, at some point as part of the recommendation. I could be wrong about this, but one of the statements was that the calls for police services had increased. But I also am curious to know if that had something to do with profiling rather than actually them committing crime. And I don't know, I'm just making a generalized statement here, because that does happen and it's possible. And so I would caution that to be a case. Again,
I forgot to mention, this is in the report itself, that the increase in crime by that, element of what the police code is transient element, basically basically people living in encampments has, those statistics are very well kept by the police department. And certainly if you want to hear more details, I think the chief or the deputy chief would be able to. Last I heard, they didn't have the figures for this year. But I will say one thing that came out in the meeting, and this is in the report, I condensed the PowerPoint, but it is true that many of those criminal calls are for trespassing, which is a crime, okay? But there are people that might see that, well, okay, they're homeless, where are they supposed to go? So that's going to be, so it is true that many of those criminal complaints are for trespassing, but that still is a criminal complaint, because trespassing is still a crime, so.
yeah, and I think you said what I would have said. Where do they go? And because
Thank you. Can I also add
Yeah.
to that? We asked Deputy Chief Neal to give us updated encampment updates almost every meeting, every other meeting. And we also had a map of where the encampments are, even though the encampments are moving. And there was a proven fact that crime is increased in areas of encampments. And high levels of using the opioid, the heroin. When people are using, we know they're stealing, and which is another reason for the emphasis on clearing out the camps. So, yeah. Oh, and Deputy Chief Neal is going to be doing a presentation for you about that.
Later, I don't know.
Later.
Okay.
We don't know when.
Thank you. And then when we talked about root causes, employment, I think, should also be addressed heavily, and workforce development is something that we need to really think about as a city, because if my pay goes down, I wouldn't be able to afford to live. And that has happened to me, and I was couch surfing for a while. And so that's important. And also even people who are on the wait list on Section 8, because something about some subsidy came up in the report. And today there was a report that said that at the federal level, they're considering cutting subsidies. And so if that does happen, and we're talking about billions of dollars, if that does happen, then people who are already being housed through the voucher program may not get those housing. So there's another layer that is going to increase homelessness. And so I think what we did today is valuable, but then I know the task force is probably sunsetting, but I think the city should really be considering what could happen at that point.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have more, but maybe somebody else will say it.
All right. Councilmember, thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to thank Sherry and Yarden, the whole group, just for their time and energy. I think it took a lot of your time probably, and I know that both of you have came to present to my committee in Parks every month since the task force, since the mayor had them do that, and so I appreciate that. one of the questions I had is what is kind of the group's metrics for success for this, and what would you say are some metrics for success? And then also, I was kind of looking in the document for, you know, a dollar sign attached, but I know that's a lot more research. So what are some potential costs?
We talked about this. It's very difficult to measure metrics when we're talking about this, just this complicated issue. And setting goals sometimes can have the opposite effect. Sometimes, and there's so much to still be learned. As Lydia was saying, and I'll give you an example. And we talked about the cookie cutter situation. When the city brought in the 1,000 units of affordable housing, people moved here to this city on Section 8 vouchers from other states and filled those units up before our own people even knew about them. And now that contractor's term is up, or the time is up for those to be low income, those rents are raising, which is going to lead to more homelessness. So we have, as Lydia said, layers and layers of things to look at, and so we were careful about metrics, and we don't want to, because we had controversy in the task force over it. There are people that believe that we wouldn't have a problem with homelessness if there was housing. But if we just put in housing, how will they sustain? How will they afford it? What about employment? What about all the opportunities? And how do we help people help themselves? I think that was one of our big goals, was really focusing on that. And part of that's kind of bringing us all together in this next phase. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, let me just add that, Councilmember Johnson, if you look at the actual report, page 7, like I had said at my presentation, almost the key recommendation is recommendation 2, which is the community coordinator response. And under that, letter G is that it would have to evaluate its own success rate in reducing homelessness in Federal Way on a biannual basis and readjust its efforts as necessary. So, and in terms of the financial, you're right. They're not a lot of key financial markers, but I did identify some that we talked about the staff person for the coordinated response, about the website staff person, about the Albuquerque program, Albuquerque type program, the work crew. So there were some cost elements in there like that. But like I said, I think the key element is the coordinated response, which that's probably the central recommendation, because from there we can sort of branch out and look at, they can look and evaluate their success and see exactly what's needed.
We did with several of the task groups as they were bringing in as the recommendations started to come in, we heard you all. I want you to know that, and I appreciate that you were out there for months asking for some dollar signs or some idea or something to put aside for us, so thank you for that. We really had a hard time getting any real solid figures. We really looked into the city of Philadelphia, and tried to find out how they did that, how they did this website, how they funded it, and we weren't getting a whole lot back. The task force members spent a month, 4 weeks. Are any of them here? You guys spent a long time trying to get that information. So we have the estimate at $150,000, and that's just basically from talking to IT people. So, did I answer your questions?
Well,
okay.
Maybe with regard to getting a hard number like that from Philadelphia, my office and Yarden, I can get just follow up from an official standpoint. We were looking for these figures. Councilmember Duclos.
Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for the report. It was very, very informative. I was actually on the first committee, the 10-year committee to end homelessness. And that's when homelessness first became a problem, and we met quite a bit up in Seattle. And at that time, I really questioned whether we would ever end homelessness. And I was one of the few people that spoke out and raised that. Of course, I was shunned by most of the people on the committee. And here we are, years later, and we still are having the problem. I go up to the Town Square Park and do a mile every Wednesday. It's part of my routine, because I don't have the dog. He goes to daycare, so I can get to actually do a real walk. And I see people up there with their shopping carts and all of their clothes and everything else. And then they'll either be sleeping on the ground, or they'll go under the shelter over there where the tables are. and they'll just stay there for the day or wherever, and then I don't know if they have a place to go at night and sleep, and then maybe have to leave for the day or what, but.
Yeah, and it
Sad.
depends. It's very
really sad to see it.
Yeah, thank you. It is sad, and one of the things we learned with the resources that the police give to people is that they don't necessarily always want to accept them, and then what do you do? I mean, then what? But you will be surprised when it all comes together of how much really is happening in the city and opportunities that there are for people. Even people that don't have, for example, if someone doesn't have any health insurance or any ID or a Section 8 voucher, just basically someone that has nothing, or Medicare or Medicaid, they can go into Valley Cities and they'll actually help them qualify for and get all that stuff started that just for Medicaid. And then they can help them get into treatment, and there's a lot of great things happening.
I believe that. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Honda and Councilmember Tran.
I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to limit them because of our time. How many officers are spending their entire shifts working with the homeless population? That's my first question.
That's our SOU unit, and there's 4 officers and 1 lieutenant.
Are they responding to criminal activity or a social work type of activity that needs to be done?
Criminal.
Okay. And that's new in the last couple of years?
Last couple of years.
Thank you. And before I forget, I'd like to thank all of the task force members for your hours at work. I really appreciate it. Does MSC, when a family, and I know I've sent families to MSC for help, do they have someone who coordinates their care there?
You want to come up to this?
And would this person that is suggested that we hire work with that person at MSC if you have such a person?
Thank you for asking the question. So when somebody comes to MSC, it's a family that is in need of housing. One of the things that's changed over the past several years is because we get funding from King County, they have to go to coordinated entry. So whereas before we could just place them in one of our shelters, we're not able to do that now. And that's really come down from the federal government, from HUD. And so what happens is we do have people on site that can help them qualify for that, but then ultimately they have to go through coordinated entry to be placed at a shelter. In terms of the position that's being talked about here, I think that the intent is that's more of a convening position. However, I would anticipate, speaking for myself, I would anticipate that that position and that group would be working with other service providers in the area. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you very much. Sure. And then my last question is, when camps are cleaned out, and I've been through the camps, I've seen what they look like. When they're cleaned out, the homeless folks will move to another site. And it seems like they're moving on a regular basis as camps are cleaned out. So where is it that we would have someone who is homeless? Where would we go? Where would we send them? If they can't be on private property and they can't be on public property, where exactly should they go?
Well, that's a good question, and I think one of my questions is, where did you come from? First of all, so when you came in and you trespassed onto someone's property, where did you come from? They can go wherever they want to go. They have resources, but it's not the city's responsibility or liability to actually take them and force them. They have free will. So that's what we learned from talking to the homeless people is you've got, they can go wherever they want to go. The question is, we'd really like to know, like, when we look at peer navigators and sending people out with the police, who are you, where'd you come from, what's your story, what type of help do you need, are you choosing to live out here, or there's just so many variables. So it can't be something that someone can just walk into the city and walk onto private property and trespass and then have the expectation that the city will then put them into a shelter.
Let me add something on that. I appreciate it. So as was indicated, that as Sherry had said, and as was in the report and the recommendation, that the goal of this would be that agencies, that there be multiple service agencies that would go along with the police when they dismantle an encampment. And I was wondering if Deputy Chief Neal could maybe give a little bit of explanation of how that's done already, right, at this point, or how does that work these days?
Well, as we went over in the task force, it's very limited to the amount of people. I told one story where we had multiple people in one private lot where there were several people, but we only had one service provider to go out there. Of course, in an ideal world, wouldn't it be nice to have a provider to do a face-to-face with everybody that's displaced from a campsite? But unfortunately, that's not the way it is.
And I believe that there's shelter options in local cities are also have those resources too. So there's they're going in, but there's definitely not enough room for this city to shelter every person that comes out of an encampment.
If I can just add one thing, I think what we're talking about is one of the possible solutions here is to have more places. That's kind of what I think part of what this task force was doing is try to come up with more places so that you can provide. That's the ideal situation.
And that's in the report, and that's in the recommendations.
And let me just say that part of the community coordinator response and the outgrowth of that is responding to what Deputy Chief Neal said, which is that, you know, it was sort of a unfortunate situation that they dismantled an encampment and there was only one agency representative there. So part of the goal and part of the recommendations here is that out of the community coordinated response would come outreach teams that would actually be available with multiple service providers to go out when an encampment's dismantled, as Deputy Chief Neal said would be great.
And the peer navigators to help that person along, to really get to know that person and find out what their needs are and help them through getting their life back.
Great, thank you. Before I call on Councilmember Tran, I don't know if we've mentioned, but Jeff Bellinghausen, our vice chair of the committee, captain of the South County Fire Department, and also a community affairs officer. Thank you, Jeff, for your role as vice chair in this and all of your work, especially with everything else you've got going. We all live very busy lives, so the fact that you guys all took 8 months and produced this report was great. Yarden, I just want to say, so Yarden produced the first, I think, you know, just to kind of peel back the curtain here, Yarden produced one of his traditional lengthier reports, and it was very, very detailed. And then Judge Larson, our former trial attorney, former legal writer, or actually even current legal writer, was able to really take out the editing pen and really condense it down. So we're very fortunate to have that. So we have a really, but thank you everybody for working on that. I do want to say also with regard to the draft that we took input from, that the task force took input from all of the members and all of the folks that they reached out to. Councilmember Tran.
Thank you, Mayor. Sherry, member of the task force, I just want to say thank you very much for this comprehensive report. We appreciate it. I don't know if many of you know, but I was homeless many years ago when I lived in a remote island in the middle of the ocean in Malaysia for 9 months. So I went through that experience, and so I can relate. I just want to make one suggestion because I didn't see 2 state agencies that I believe could help with the task force to coordinate the services. The first one is employment security, where they provide job training and job placement. The other one is DSHS, my office right here. I believe most of the homeless people would qualify for DSHS services and benefits. And my office is a great place that we can connect and coordinate the services. I just want to make that suggestion.
What was the name of the first one?
Employment security.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. And Captain Bellinghausen, did you want to say anything? You're doing a great job. Okay, and also thank you. And let's not forget Jeff Watson and Sarah Bridgeford when you talk about editing, because they were very helpful too, and
That's right.
everything.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Judge Larson would like to say a few words.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Hold on, actually, before we get to Judge Larson, Councilmember Kopang.
Yeah, thank you. Sherry, really wanted to just publicly thank you for your leadership. This is a subject that I think engenders a lot of passion in the community. And I know that the members that came, or the members of the task force were passionate. And in some cases, there was a lot of differences of opinion. And to take all those differences of opinion and distill it down into concise recommendations and observations that the council can utilize and the staff can utilize, I think is definitely an accomplishment. So while I certainly thank the task force as a whole, I wanted to just express my appreciation to you for your leadership in that process. I think looking at this, it's a large report. It's not overwhelmingly large. It's brief enough that I think we can all read it and understand it. But I think in digesting all the information, we all are going to have our points of interest. But as someone that has really been looking at this for 2 years now, with your efforts on the Mothers and Children's Task Force and now the Homelessness Task Force. What would be a point or 2 points of emphasis that you would like to make to both the council and the community in regards to this report?
That's a good question. I've tried to say sort of non-bias with this. There things came through that wouldn't have been on my list personally. I know Captain Billenhausen and I really worked hard on letting the group do its work and come together. Like you said, it was difficult at times. We had varying opinions about things. So are you asking me personally?
Well, I think yes, or putting your leadership hat on, say this is one of the things that I really think was very important based on my understanding of the group's perception. So either one. I think I'm just asking for just something for us to kind of to look at, maybe, and understand and give perspective to the report overall.
So I would say it's right. I was just going to say that he was making the suggestion. Our recommendation number 2, which was the community coordinated response, is crucial for us to make a dent in this city and make anything better for anybody. We have people that are so excited about this. We need the support of the council and the mayor. We're going to. This is just the first. What we realize is this is just the first step of something really big that needs to happen for any kind of change to take place. So I would highly recommend you do everything you can to support that recommendation and making it happen, even if the state legislator, if the ask is for that position, and even if that doesn't happen, we will still work on ways to bring this together, kind of the larger umbrella of it all. I would caution you as council members, when it comes to service providers that come to you and ask for money and ask and tell you that you're part of a region. There are a lot of them out there, and I would use caution and really look into their backgrounds, who they're connected with. We are a part of King County, but we're also, I don't know about you, but I live, my house is 2 miles from the Pierce County border line, so we're really part of that region too. And if we start giving money to providers, in this case, the $26,000 is going to be given to this group to come back and tell you what you need to do to spend more money. That's a lot of money to pay somebody else to tell you. So personally, I would caution you, because this is the first. You will get approached from Pierce County. You'll get approached and be told you're part of even a bigger region, potentially. So really look into those and look into those as you see these coming up and as they come to approach you. There's not just one. Yeah, so does that help?
No, I think
Okay.
recommendation 2, I think is certainly was key to me as well, so I appreciate you reinforcing that point. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And as Judge Larson comes up, I don't have any pink sheets, so if anybody would like to talk to the council and give us your input, please fill out a pink sheet, give it to the city clerk, and we'll call you. We have about 14 minutes left before we need to retire into executive session. Your Honor.
I'll try to keep it very brief. First of all, the credit's been shined on me way too much because all I did was reword the work of a lot of good people and a lot of effort that went in. So I didn't do much other than just kind of bring it into less words. Even though somebody put it's wordy or it's whatever, it is what it is. You know, it's half of what it was, but you can't say enough about the problem, though. And the thing is, if you asked us to cure cancer, it might have been an easier task, or to cure world hunger, because it is a daunting type of a issue. And what we've done is we've been treating symptoms for a long, long time. And each of us, and by the way, I can only address public bodies voluntarily if it's about the courts, the legal system, or the administration of justice, and that's why I'm here, because we're part of a jigsaw puzzle. And every one of us that represent different aspects of this is like a jigsaw puzzle. But nobody gave us a box to see what the big picture looks like, right? And so each of us are working on our little jigsaw puzzle, part of the jigsaw puzzle, without seeing the bigger picture. And this recommendation 2, what it does is bring that together. We're actually looking at root causes. So to refer to Councilmember Johnson's question, if you look at that list of people you want on there and you see it as a continuum, you're talking about anywhere from the person that's living under a tarp that's addicted out in one of these camps to the person that's $30 short on their deposit and had a prior problem with their landlord and they can't get into a unit. You got that whole spectrum, and you meet people where they are. You give them the dignity of meeting people where they are and getting them on that continuum, which includes even trade unions, even apprenticeship programs, education, anything that will get them into sustainable housing and sustainable lifestyles. And so that's a significant part of this, is to get people on that type of a pattern. The one thing I wanted to mention that the Yarden didn't mention is on the shelters, is that the evidence showed that in the cities that have full-time shelters, their rates of success are double that of communities with part-time shelters. So that it's not just adding more shelters, there's a cause and effect. The reason the court's concerned about this is because I don't want to have to, and what we're doing right now is we're reinventing a wheel. We're creating another silo with community court. I don't want to do that. I'd just soon have our people be able to plug into the same programs that other people plug into that already exist and not have to reinvent a wheel in the court. And so why not have those programs be available to law-abiding people as well as people that have stepped into the court system for whatever reason and now want to be able to step out of that and be a law-abiding citizen and a productive citizen. Why not let them be on the same continuum that everybody else is? And you don't have to commit a crime to get special treatment in community court. You actually can be a law-abiding citizen and have this continuum. What I've learned from community court is the frustration of the homeless people. They get broken promise after broken promise, and the interaction and the interface with the system is demeaning to them. We got to figure out a way to cohesively address these folks, to give a choke point where they can come and interact and be put on that continuum in a compassionate way. So, like I said, I'm here on behalf of the court because the court benefits from this cohesive community coordinated response that balances the compassion all of us want to have and the accountability our community needs from people, from ourselves, and from people that we're helping. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we've got 3 pink sheets.
Mayor, I just wanted to make it clear, just in fairness, and reiterate what Sherry had said, that the report really, and I really appreciate the compliments. I mean, the report was put together based on individual reports that were done by task force members. I did not write. I did some editing on it along with Jeff Watson, Sarah Bridgeford, Jeff Bellinghausen, Sherry, and then later Judge Larson as well. And I did some individual editing and group editing, and we all kind of collaborated on that. But the actual written product was actually done directly by task force members, all of it. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Thank you very much. I think that is important. All right, we've got 3 comments, and we've got 10 minutes. At 3 minutes each, we should be just fine. David Zumwalt, Willa Gaines, and Betty Taylor.
Hi, I'm Dave Zumwalt. I didn't come here prepared to really talk about anything, but I'm born and raised in Federal Way, and just 2 years ago I was homeless, living in the woods. Sorry. Homeless drug addict. So I can only speak on the homeless people that are the drug addicts living in the woods. And a lot of them, we're not looking for a place to live. We just want our drugs. We want to go out. We commit crime. We steal your garbage. We steal your lawnmowers. We steal from the stores. We scrap the metal. We go to the casino. We get high. Just like everyone who's unemployed is not looking for work, not everyone who's homeless is looking for a place to stay. It's just life got hard, and it's easier to be homeless and have no responsibility than it is to actually go out, work, and try to get your stuff back together. So with that said, I mean, there's the, they need focus and purpose in life. And a lot of them, they give up on it because their commitment to doing drugs is overran the commitment to their family and their kids and anything else. Battlefield addiction, they saved my life. They brought me in, they connected me with the family community just like they said they do. They got me clean and sober housing. I now work as a drug and alcohol counselor. There's not nothing much more I can say about that. But I'm from Federal Way, and I would love to be part of the team and to help out, especially with the peers. I know a lot of the homeless that still live in the woods. I try to get them into inpatient all the time. Some of them want help, some of them don't. But that's just a perspective from me, from being a homeless drug addict myself. So thank you.
Thank you, David. And great job, really turning around your life. Willa Gaines, and then Betty Taylor.
Hi, it was a privilege to thank you, Sherry and Jeff, for leading, and for the city staff who worked so hard. I don't want to have recommendation number 1 overlooked. We're talking about recommendation number 2 quite a lot tonight, coordination. Number 1 says we need places. These people are not going to recover in our park where you see them when you go out for your walk. They're not going to recover on the doorstep of some church. They need to be in a location that gives them some comfort, that has them feel cared about, that gives them some hope. Some folks say people like to be in the woods, and Dwight Jackson, our first CCS program director that we had for Reach Out, said they've given up. And if we can find places for them to spend some time and to feel cared about, there's a proposal for a family shelter in Federal Way. That's very important. People do not recover in cars. People do not recover on doorsteps. They do not recover in the woods. We need places for people to go to get care.
Thank you, Willa. Betty Taylor, and then Tillman Paramore Sr.
Good evening. I just have a couple of things to say. Let me see. A question that I had. I really want to know, why was the homeless task force? Why was it such a closed group? Why was there no public input? Why was there no public comment? Because this is our community, and we live in Federal Way, and the public could have presented some more like ideals or suggestions. I'm thinking just like the suggestion that Councilmember Tran brought up about connecting with DSHS. Just like Councilman Lydia brought up a good point about connecting with King County Housing Authority. Those are good points, but I think the Homeless Task Force, they missed those points. So public input is very important, and in going forward, I really hope, I don't know, but I hope that they could be open. You know, I hope that the public, the Homeless Task Force would embrace the community, would embrace input, because that's what you need. In order, we got to move forward. We have to move forward together. It's not no more closed stuff. We need it open, and we live here. We breathe here. and this is our community, and you need our input as well as we need yours. We need to work together. So, and then also, it would help like to partner with other agencies, like even in Seattle, because Seattle has a big homeless population, and they partner with a lot of agencies. There's there's so much that we can do this together if we work together as a team.
Great, thank you, Betty. Chair Edwards, did you wish to address that point quickly?
Yes, please. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It was my idea, and it was my request to have these meetings closed. The reason for it, one of the main reasons for it, was for safety. We had one of our members had a restraining order against a community member, and I was very worried about his safety, about the safety of the group. This was a working task force. We couldn't invite the public because we couldn't have a public input comment section. So the people that put together the task force worked really hard to get a representative from all walks of life in this community. And I do want to also add that when we're trying to, this is very controversial, when we are trying to open a shelter or find a location, we had a very hard time with HMCI. It took us almost a year we went to twice the faith-based community, in this room, we invited all 90 congregations in the city into this room and told them we have an urgent need to house families with children, and what will you do? Can you do anything for us? And one of all 90, one of them came forward, and that was Pastor Miller at New Hope. Pastor, then, as soon as the media got that, he was threatened. Then, of course, came the neighborhood, that people in the neighborhood said, not in my neighborhood, not in my neighborhood. And when that happens, we have such a problem because, in fact, to one of the neighbors, I asked that neighbor, well, can you help us find another location? So when we have that kind of thing, he ended up having to have a restraining order against the person, and there was a lot of reasons that I needed to have those meetings closed. Anybody and everybody could have given any kind of input and was welcome to, and we got it at the city. So all of the input from public members was given to us, and we also let the reporters know that at the paper that at any time you could. But this was my decision to have them closed. There was nothing secret about it. It was. Task members were not going to be put on display and videotaped while they work. They wouldn't have been possible anyway. So I just want to make that very clear. I've said it before, but I want to make sure to say it again. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Tillman Paramore, Sr. We've got, this will be the last comment.
Thank you for me being here to be able to speak. I hear a lot about the task force that you have for a criminal activity, but I heard nothing about, excuse me, about the social workers. Need to be working with these people. Excuse me. I'm trying to get over a flu. But do we have those in place? Social workers that's going to be working with the people that are not doing any illegal activities. There's very little that I've heard since I've been here about any social worker, any interns there trying to help these people that are not, thank you, that are not doing illegal activities. And I've been around, I've helped, you see, I'm a veteran myself. There's over 50,000 veterans, and I'm talking about not only vets, but them and their families that are homeless right today. They're not out there doing any illegal anything, but they're reaching out for help. Like you said, if you don't have ID, you can't get into the federal building. You can't get into any building pretty much nowadays, you know, to try to seek help. So a lot of them have returned, from trying to do the right thing to doing illegal activities just to live, to feed their families. But the social workers, I have seen very little of social workers there that mean to do these people any good. Everybody is not, if you still just to feed your family, that's one thing. If you had to rob in the bank, that's another. But what about those that are really truly trying to do the right thing but don't have the resources or can't get the resources? So, that's really my goal right now. I'm here. I would like to help in any capacity I may be able to. I was a VCR for the government, and I still am. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's why we're here, sir, to make sure that we can get the resources there where they're most needed. We are at time now. We're just a little bit over at 6:31. Sherry, did you have anything last? Okay. All right. Once again, thank you very much, Council. Great job. Task force members, thank you. Members of the public, thank you. We are now in recess for pursuant to executive session for potential litigation pursuant to RCW 4230-1101I. Executive session will last approximately 30 minutes, probably about 29.
Sorry.
I remember you.